To the Point with Michael Williams.
Good morning. The Florida face is poised to be in Donald Trump's cabinet after the president-elect takes the oath of office. Brian Crowley will examine that, including more than a bit of controversy, later in the broadcast. First, Mr. Trump's pledge for mass deportations. What does it mean in Florida and elsewhere? My guest today is longtime and noted immigration attorney, Richard Hujber. We appreciate you being with us, sir.
Thank you so much.
Mass deportation, what may that look like in Florida?
Well, it's going to be quite an undertaking. It's going to be really complicated because there are certain resources that are obviously very limited in terms of ICE agents and the ability to actually carry out what these plans are. You know, for the most part, they've been able to deport maximum 1 million people a year. That's on years where they could actually get to that point. The last 4 years, they've never even gotten a dent into that point under the Biden administration.
I know estimates vary. What do estimates suggest might be the number of people living in Florida illegally?
Last number I saw was basically 1.3 million, but I think that there's a lot of gotaways, a lot of numbers that you don't really can calculate, so it could be even closer to 2 million.
What kind of phone calls are you getting?
A lot of panicked clients. You know, I've kind of been through this once before, obviously, in the first go-around with the Trump administration, and so clients would come in, frankly, losing sleep. Some would be very nervous and worried and concerned, and it's challenging because it does make for a more challenging case as you prepare it.
Some tend to think about this as a Trump administration issue. Then President Obama deported a considerable number of illegal immigrants. So this is illegal migrants. This is not something that's just something that came anew. In fact, we've been wrestling with this ever since the last major immigration reform in 1986. Is it part of that and the fact that we've made this a political hot potato that's put us where we are today? Talk about that.
Without a doubt. I've been going to Congress every year for the last probably 10 years or so, and you try to have discussions with regard to how can we fix this system, because it is broken, there's no doubt about it. And it's always a political hot potato. It's always some leverage or some kind of a game in which you try for this, but they won't budge. It's both sides have used this as a political issue for sure.
What are the fixes that you think we need?
I mean, I'm in immigration court every day. I used to work at the immigration court, and I could tell you they are so overwhelmed and backlogged with a huge volume of cases that there are probably about a third of the cases right now that are cases involving people here for more than 10 years that have U.S. citizen children. It's called cancellation of removal. And if they were to just come up with some reform in which those people could potentially have a pathway to green card status, they could knock out a third of the cases. And then you could put your priorities more on what I know Donald Trump wants to prioritize, which is criminals, which is people, let's say, that have already got a final order of deportation, which they really want to deport, I think. And then the recent asylees, which is by the millions asylum seekers from the last 4 years of Joe Biden's presidency that I know Trump also is prioritizing. So you could easily clear a huge amount of cases, and clients of mine, frankly, that are sitting in immigration court waiting for years for progress in their case, but they're backlogged for many years.
They were here, they're still technically here illegally, but they've been here living, paying taxes for perhaps a decade or more.
Right.
Many will say that's the prudent and compassionate thing to do. What do you say to those who will watch? Well, they came illegally, too bad.
I mean, honestly, some actually maybe came with a visa. I mean, a huge amount of the people that are here without status actually overstayed their visas. So some may have come legally, then there was a change of plans, a change of circumstances, they've overstayed their visa, and ever since they've had U.S. citizen children paying their taxes with no criminal record. I think there has to be certain caveats and restrictions, obviously, in terms of having taxes being paid. Maybe there's some kind of a fine. There was a fine 23 years ago, something called 245I, where they paid a $1,000 penalty to fix their status. Now it could be $5,000. My clients will pay $5,000. They'll pay $10,000 if it means helping our debt, our deficit, if it means allowing them to finally have resolution in their lives.
You and I have talked a lot over the years. You're not somebody who in any ways reflexively saying, listen, just let's turn a blind eye. In fact, you've said we need to be more forceful in terms of creating laws that are clearly defined, that we make sure we're keeping people out, criminals or backgrounds such as that, creating illegal acts. Speak to that nuance, because I think people sometimes think, oh, immigration attorney, it's come one, come all, no matter what.
I'm definitely the exception. I'm the son of immigrants. My parents came here from Hungary, but I'm also a former government attorney. So I've seen both sides of the aisle for so long. I've interviewed to be an immigration judge because I think I'm actually down the middle. I really do feel that way because they bring so much to the table. This is such a huge part of our economy and our communities. But we have to have laws in order. We have to have an orderly system. We have to have at least certain limits in place because, again, We have millions of asylum applications pending. Many of them are frivolous. Many of them have no case whatsoever, and they tell me this when they come to my office. And it affects the ones that actually do have a compelling case.
Mr. Hujber, a headline from WLRN. Even immigrants with lawful status brace for Trump's mass deportation. There's an argument that some who are undocumented, perhaps working in the fields, working in other manual labor jobs in agriculture, may stay under the radar, but people with some kind of status may be the first who should have to or will have to worry about possible deportation. Your sense of that?
My take is that his focus will likely be on the recent entrants because so many have come in the last 4 years. So some of them may have a work permit because they did file for asylum, but the asylum case is borderline viable. Many are not even viable. So those cases need to be streamlined. They need to be heard. Everyone has the right to due process. They get to present their case, but that takes time. And I don't think there's enough immigration judges, frankly, or resources to really get this done.
So we can talk about mass deportation, but the ability to deal with the bottlenecks that would inevitably occur immediately, I hear you saying, are going to be huge and could stifle any such effort.
Right.
And talk about the DeSantis factor. At one point was sending migrants by plane to Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
Clearly has sounded a message that in many ways is analogous to that of the president-elect in terms of needing to get tough. How do you see that as a factor in what happens in Florida?
It seems to have worked. It was a huge issue, and not just in Florida. I mean, in the swing states like Georgia and other states, those actions that he took to get into the spotlight, to get the attention by doing that with the Martha's Vineyard, and it was a lot of people, but it just was the whole point to be made. It's challenging. I've had clients that have said ever since the law that was passed regarding driver's license and E-Verify that have moved to other states. And of course, it definitely affects people because they find it very fearful to drive without a license, to be able to try to work when they have no status. It certainly causes a lot of tension and frustration in the community. But again, there's another side to this. I mean, we have to keep up with inflation. You know, wages potentially go down when you have so many people that are coming in. It has a lot of different impacts, and that's why it's such a complicated issue.
The economy, some say be careful what you wish for. A lot of the economy is propped up by people who are not here with documented status. Speak to that. How many people are probably working in our economy, helping prop it up in Florida, who may not have documented status?
Yeah, it's a huge problem in terms of this whole shadow economy and people that are living under the table. You know, my own person that does the work around my office, you know, he came to me and people were complaining because he'd get there at 5 in the morning, start up his equipment, these loud noises, and he's just trying to work hard, trying to get the job done. There are so many people like this that are out there, and it's going to be a huge hit depending on what this mass deportation means. How many are we talking about, and is it going to be as huge as it seems like it may be?
The president-elect's, this is from an article, the president-elect's newly named border czar, Tom Homan, who has a background in immigration and enforcement, had told Fox News, and I'm quoting here, he will, quote, prioritize deporting public safety threats and national security threats first, and that's where the focus will be. But Homan added, any immigrant in the U.S. illegally could be deported. Quoting here, if you're in the country illegally, you should not feel comfortable. Absolutely not. I wouldn't feel comfortable if I'm here illegally. You shouldn't be comfortable either, because when you enter illegally, you've committed a crime. Your thoughts, your reaction?
There are nuances to the last part of that statement, which is, you know, one of which is that asylum seekers are not necessarily breaking the law. It's about, are you presenting yourself at the port of entry? What is going on at the border? Because it is very true. The coyotes, and I hear these stories from my clients, so I know much of the background here, will guide them into a certain direction, a huge group. So of course, Border Patrol has to focus on that group. And then you have all the gotaways that go on through where the Border Patrol no longer is. So you have those concerns, national security concerns, which are truly compelling concerns, being a former government attorney. But in terms of just the prioritization of what matters, who are the people we do want to see leave? Because under this current administration of Joe Biden, they have done very minimal actual enforcement on the interior. They have a lot of numbers at the border, especially under 42, Title 42. But in terms of like the interior enforcement, and there are so many sanctuary cities with no communication with ICE, and people, as you see in the news, you see all these, you know, criminal acts that are horrific and are really horrifying the communities.
Fact or myth on that topic, do those new arrivals commit crime at a higher level than native-born Americans?
It just depends on what you listen to. I mean, you certainly have organizations like FAIR, but then you have other organizations that say they commit crimes at a lower level. I mean, is it establishing a certain sense within my clients? I'll be honest, in the last 4 years, my sense is some of my clients were not taking things seriously enough because things looked kind of lax. It looked like things were not being respected, the laws weren't being enforced, and that does, I think, to a certain extent, create this environment or thought process that, hey, these rules or laws aren't really enforced and not to be taken seriously.
Briefly, fact or myth or a combination therein that those new arrivals are taking jobs away from native-born Americans?
I don't think there could be a doubt about that. It's really, are these jobs Americans are going to be doing? But if they weren't there, what would the salaries be like? Would it be possible to be able to even have Americans do those jobs? How would that affect the prices of goods? I mean, there's a whole economic evaluation there.
So much we can talk about. I know we're only scratching the surface, but in your remaining moments, what's the message you want our audience to hear? And if you could again have that seat at the table with what we're told is coming, what would you be saying about, and concluding remarks about how to focus, where to go, and how to mix tough enforcement with some degree of empathy? And what's your closing message to our audience?
I think it becomes very difficult when people use the phrase case by case when you see there are millions of cases. I mean, it really does make it challenging for an immigration judge or even ICE itself to decide, is this person someone we want to put into deportation proceedings? Is this person with family, with kids, here 15, 20 years? A lot of my clients have been here 20 plus years.
Will they be ripped away, as critics argue, from their children?
I just don't see how it could be done in terms of what we already have as a huge backlog in the immigration court system nationwide, but especially Miami has the biggest backlog in the entire country, the Miami Immigration Court. So how do you put in people like that when you have priorities that really are much more important for anyone? I mean, you have people with a criminal record. You have people here, some with a final order of deportation. Almost 1 million people live in this country with a final order of deportation. There may be close to 1 million people here with a criminal record that are also here illegally. Some people should be priority, but if you do prioritize them, there's just no way that realistically you can then say, let's go after as well, you know, these people that have families, 15, 20 years, paying taxes, no criminal record. Is that really what we want to see happen? I mean, we have to have some discretion, some balancing factors, and that takes time. And unfortunately, from what I hear with regard to the system, is there going to be the time and the real case-by-case analysis that I think is deserving in these cases, but a lot of times it doesn't happen, unfortunately.
The debate will only get a lot louder on all sides. We appreciate you offering us perspective. You've seen it from both sides and have made eloquent arguments, as you have in the past with me, on all sides of a very, very tough equation. Richard Hujber, thanks for being my guest today.
My pleasure, thank you.
See you again. We know we'll have you back. We appreciate it. Onward, he's from North Florida. He has his sights set on the FBI, he says, if need be, among others, and he is part of the focus of our roundtable next.